foreign affairs and trade operations in the area of South and West Asia, Middle East and Africa. And Senator Rhiannon is continuing her questions in relation to Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Chair. In response to a question without notice asked on May 16, Minister Carr said that he would take advice from the High Commission in Colombo about the Rajapaksa regime's compulsory acquisition of traditional Tamil lands for no public purpose. Did you request this advice, and what information did it contain if it was received?
Yes, Senator. Jennifer Rawson, First Assistant Secretary, South and West Asia and Middle East Division. We have, as Senator Carr indicated, sought some advice from our High Commission in Colombo on this issue. The basic point I'd make is that land ownership does remain a controversial and complicated issue in Sri Lanka, particularly as a result of the displacement during the Civil War. There are disputes between those asserting original ownership of the land and the military, as well as many private disputes amongst individuals. The situation isn't helped by the fact that a number of land title documents were lost or destroyed during the conflict. I think it is recognised that resolving the issues of land ownership will be critical to reconciliation and stability in Sri Lanka. And indeed, land ownership was a significant, or is a significant, focus of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission report. The assessment is that there has been some progress in that area. There is progressive releasing of land that has been demined or vacated by the military to its rightful owners. However, there does remain issues around the permanent acquisition of large tracts of private land in the northern and eastern provinces for military or other use, which isn't consistent with the recommendations made by the Commission and does need to be addressed impartially. And transparently, and the High Commission will continue to monitor that. I understand that in regard to some of that compulsory acquisition by the military, there has been court action taken by a number of the landowners, and that is underway. I'm not aware that there's been any outcome from that, Senator. So that's the information I have available.
Thank you. In your response then, you did note that there has been some progress with land returned to its rightful owners. What are you basing that statement on? Is it a statement that you know that that's happened, or is it something the Rajapaksa regime has said?
I think it is generally accepted that as people have gone from the camps and have been settled back into the areas, at least some of those people have been able to return to their original land holdings that had been used for military and other purposes during the conflict. But by no means all of those people. Some have been resettled in other areas. So it's a mixed picture, Senator.
And where do the information that is it from your own people making that assessment, or is it from what the Rajapaksa administration tell you?
I think, Senator, it's an assessment made by our High Commission in Colombo. They do travel, as you know, they talk to a wide range of people to gather information, not only government sources, a wide range of sources. They do travel to the north and east and gather information and talk to people there. So a mixed picture is probably, rather than progress, a mixed picture.
Thank you. In December 2012, the Foreign Minister committed $45 million to build or rebuild poor and rural communities in Sri Lanka. Are any of the construction works from this money occurring in northern areas, such as Jaffna, set to be compulsorily acquired?
I would have to take that on notice and probably better address to AusAid, but in principle, I cannot, my expectation would be that we would not be working in land that has been compulsory acquired. So I would be extremely surprised if that were the case, but I'd have to take that
Thank
on
you.
notice.
Is any of the money intended to be spent in traditional Tamil lands or in Sinhalese areas only?
I don't know the answer to
Take it
that,
on notice.
Senator, but or AusAid may be able to help you tomorrow evening, because it is money that comes within the Development Cooperation Program.
How closely is this $45 million being monitored or controlled by the department?
Again, it is.
So it's totally AusAid?
It's aid money, so it would be administered by AusAid.
If there are signs of political interference in the Supreme Court hearing of the Tamils application, what kinds of measures will the government consider to stem this gradual collapse of democratic institutions?
Senator, I'm not aware that there have been any allegations of interference in that process.
It's to do with the some of the Tamils owning lands in Valakkalam North. They've filed writs in the Supreme Court to reclaim their lands adjacent to an allegedly lapsed high security zone. So there's been talk of concern expressed about possible political interference. So I was just interested in any measures that the government would consider in how do you respond to that, considering we have such a high level of engagement with Sri Lanka?
Senator, I don't know the facts of that particular case, so I would take it on notice. But I would add that, as Senator Carr has said here and in the House and publicly on a number of occasions, we have a very robust dialogue with the Sri Lankan government about human rights issues and including issues around independence of the judiciary. So if the situation you described, as I say, I don't know the details, but those sorts of issues come within the framework of the dialogue that we do have with the Sri Lankan government.
Thank you. How many requests for asylum and humanitarian protection were received by the Australian High Commission in Colombo?
I don't have the answer to that. Normally the High Commission would not receive those requests. They go through the DIAC channels or UNHCR.
But isn't DIAC based in the Commission?
Yeah, there are DIAC people in the High Commission, but normally requests for, and I'm getting into an area where I'm not familiar with all the tests, but normally requests for asylum wouldn't come to the High Commission. They would be dealt with through UNHCR and other processes.
I thought the High Commission had a mechanism where they could assist people who apply for asylum, and that was what I wanted to explore. Has that happened, and if it has, have any people been given assistance?
I'm not aware of any instance where an application has been made at the High Commission, but I can take that
You can
on
take
notice.
that on notice. Thank you. DFAT has previously advised that asylum seekers who have been involuntarily returned from Australia are able to make a complaint to the Australian High Commission about their treatment in Sri Lanka on return. If so, what is the process that returnees must follow to make a complaint to the High Commission about mistreatment on their return?
Yeah, I think, Senator, the advice wasn't that they were able to or invited to make complaints to the High Commission. There have been instances where complaints or allegations of mistreatment in a small number of cases have been drawn to the attention of the High Commission or one of the officers of the High Commission. And in a couple of those cases, as I think we informed the committee last time, there has been some follow-up by the High Commission, not a formal investigation of any kind. The High Commission in Colombo does not have the local authority to conduct investigations, but there is some follow-up action undertaken discreetly about that. But I should make the point, it's not general practice for countries returning people whose failed asylum seekers to their country of origin to monitor the individuals after their arrival. That would be intrusive and could draw unfavourable attention to the people concerned.
But it wasn't about monitoring them, it was just, well, just is the wrong word in this case, because there has been allegations of people being mistreated. I had understood that had been one of the guarantees or one of the statements made to help handle the controversial situation when people returning. So was I mistaken that in fact that channel hasn't been opened up?
You were the understanding that there is a formal way, if you like, to register complaint. That is not the case. Obviously, if people wish to register an allegation with the High Commission, or either directly or someone else makes that allegation, that can be done. The High Commission is there, can be contacted in a number of ways, but there is no formal complaints mechanism.
So therefore, I was going to ask how many complaints have been received. It would sound like they wouldn't have been received because there's no process.
No, I think as we have said before, there have been 4 claims since 2010, 4 claims of mistreatment of returnees, and 2 of those claims have, in terms of, as I said, not investigated but follow-up and found to be unsubstantiated, and the other 2 remain subject to follow-up.
Is it possible that the small number of complaints received at the High Commission is because returnees are unaware of their ability to access the High Commission complaint process?
There is no High Commission complaint process.
Or are unaware that they can do anything about it, unaware?
It isn't part of the High Commission's sort of formal processes to be register complaints. But as I say, if claims are made and they come to the attention of the High Commission, they will be followed up as appropriate to the circumstances. And to our knowledge, there have been 4 occasions of that since 2010.
So considering there have been allegations of torture of people who have been returned to Sri Lanka, Has the DFAT implemented any proactive monitoring of this, or what's the response to those allegations?
There has been no formal response to that, and I'm not sure which instances you're referring to, but again, I go back to the point we do have a general understanding of a general dialogue with the Sri Lankan authorities. If there are any reports of harm coming to individuals following their return, they're taken seriously and would be followed up where appropriate. And that's happened in 4 cases, as I said, but we don't go out canvassing for, the High Commission doesn't go out canvassing for.
So don't go out canvassing means that it's not highlighted, publicised, that people can take up issues. People returned from Australia can take up issues with the High Commission. That's what is that what you meant?
I don't. There has been no. That isn't put out as a formal responsibility of the High Commission. But if claims are drawn to the High Commission's attention, or they became aware of them in regard to an asylum seeker who had been returned from Australia, then they will follow up as appropriate.
Is DFAT or High Commission staff ever present or involved in questioning any of the Sri Lankan people who are intercepted by Sri Lankan authorities in the context of wanting to leave the country?
Where people are stopped from... I'm not aware of any DFAT involvement in those circumstances.
Could you take that on notice if there was any DFAT or High Commission staff who have been present when Sri Lankan people who were wishing to leave the country or taken steps to leave the country have been intercepted by the authorities?
Yes, I'll take that on notice. I should add, Senator, that the High Commission in Colombo does emphasise regularly to the Sri Lankan authorities the government's expectation that all people who are detained after a people smuggling venture has been disrupted are treated in accordance with the Sri Lankan law and treated fairly and their rights respected.
Has DFAT, any DFAT staff, played a role in the interviews of interceptees at the 4th floor facilities of the Criminal Investigation Department or Terrorist Investigation Division in Colombo?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator, and I can't imagine the circumstances in which there would be a need for a DFAT officer or a wish for a DFAT officer to be there. But again, I'll make sure that I check that answer and will correct it if that's wrong.
Thank you. Is DFAT aware of the document produced by Human Rights Watch in February 2013 titled Sri Lanka Rape of Tamil Detainees?
I'm not aware of that particular document. There was a I am aware that there was a Human Rights Watch document this year. I wasn't sure whether that is the name of it. Just if you wouldn't mind, give me a moment to check my papers. Sorry, Senator. No, as I say, I am aware that there was a Human Rights Watch report. Whether it's the particular one you're referring to, I would have to check.
Thank you. Where I was leading here is that I'm partly trying to understand how your process works in terms of assessing what is happening in Sri Lanka, and then the briefings that's supplied to the Minister and to the government. So there's a Human Rights Watch report that I've just mentioned. Then in April this year, Amnesty International put out a report saying the upcoming CHOGM meeting should not be allowed to take place in Sri Lanka unless systematic violation of human rights is stopped. And then also this year, in the same month, the Commonwealth Lawyers Association passed a resolution calling for Sri Lanka's suspension from the Commonwealth altogether. So there's three significant organisations there. Do you take an assessment, do you monitor the views of such organisations and then convey the details of these reports to the Foreign Minister with regard to their decision-making about CHOGM or other activities to do with Sri Lanka?
We take into account a number of sources. I'm aware, for example, of the Amnesty International report that I think you referred to. Looking at my notes, I think the Human Rights Watch report that you referred to is the one that we had looked at. There are, of course, documents prepared in terms of Human Rights Council sessions, as we talked about. So we and the High Commission in Colombo try to draw on as much information as possible in terms of the advice we provide to the Minister about the situation in Sri Lanka.
So you've identified that you're aware of those reports. So can you confirm if information from those reports was used to inform the advice or briefings that were provided to the government?
Information from such reports is part of the information base on which the Department and the High Commission in Colombo draw on, informing advice to the Minister on what's happening in Sri Lanka. They're not the only thing, but they certainly form part of drawing the whole picture.
On April the 24th, the ABC 7:30 ran a story about a Tamil man living in Melbourne who was abducted, raped and tortured by the Sri Lankan Army intelligence officers in Sri Lanka. I was interested to know if you're aware of the story, and will the abuse of this man be addressed as part of this engagement with Sri Lanka?
I'm aware of that story. I didn't see it, but I have been told about it and the claims made. And again, the allegations and I don't that were made, and I have no basis to say whether they were accurate or not. I can't make any judgment on that. But in terms of the range of allegations made, we consistently make known to the Sri Lanka government our concerns about the human rights situation, and certainly claims that were made by the person on the ABC report would be of concern if they were correct.
So from your response, the understanding that I gain is that you would be dealing with this issue in the general rather than taking up and the specific case that was dealt with in this program. Is that a reason? Is that how I? Is that what I should conclude?
Sometimes there will be a specific instance where an individual would be singled out, if you like, in terms of the assessments made. But generally, it's in regard to the overall situation.
Has the department prepared a brief about the merits or otherwise of Australia not attending the Colombo CHOGM compared with attending the Colombo CHOGM in November?
as I said, I think in answer to Senator Eggleston before the dinner break, the government has made its position clear on going to CHOGM. It will do so.
No, I meant before the decision was made. Did you prepare advice on going and not going? Did that advice include what the Canadian Prime Minister has said that how he will handle it? Was that how you informed the Minister? My division, which has the responsibility for Sri Lanka, has not provided advice. There is another division that looks at Commonwealth matters, but I'm not aware that Australia would normally attend CHOGMs. The government's been clear that it will attend this CHOGM. But there have been experience over many years of countries not going to CHOGM, and in this case, Canada, the Canadian Prime Minister, made his statement very early. I think it was actually at the Perth meeting. So was an assessment made about that? Has the department engaged in any discussions with other Commonwealth countries about attendance or otherwise of the Canada to Sri Lanka and the implications of this development? As I said, the government's position has been clear. We, of course, discuss some issues with other Commonwealth countries, including Canada, and there have been discussions with Canada and other countries on CHOGM, but Australia's position has been clear that we will attend, and that's the basis on which the discussions would be held. So with your discussions, you've identified that there has been discussions with Canada about CHOGM. Was that to understand what level of involvement was, and/or was it about trying to persuade them, the Prime Minister, to come? What was the level of discussion, please? To my knowledge, and I'm not across all the discussions that there have been about these issues, but they would generally be in terms of putting Australia's position, as we do in most cases, about what our view is on attendance at CHOGM. It is for other countries to form their views on whether they attend or not. So could you take it on notice if there was any discussions by DFAT or ministerial staff with Canadian representatives to encourage Canada to change its position? Yes, I'll take that on notice, but as I said, I'm certainly not aware of any discussion along those lines, but I'll correct that if it's wrong. Thank you. It's come to my attention that 4 Tamils who have recently been returned from Sri Lanka by Australia are still waiting for their identification cards to be returned to them by Australian authorities. Do you know anything about this? No. So is there, considering they've been returned by the Australian authorities, can you explain where this sits in terms of responsibility between DFAT and DIAC? No, I can't, Senator. I don't even know of the existence of identification cards. So I'll have to take that on notice. Senator. Thank you. During his 2012 visit, Minister Bob Carr announced a 4-point plan for security cooperation with Sri Lanka, which he said would, among other things, increase on-water cooperation between Australia and Sri Lanka. Which Australian agencies are involved in on-water cooperation with Sri Lankan authorities?
Craig Chittick, Ambassador for People's Party, Senator. The on-water disruptions in Sri Lanka are undertaken by the Australian Navy, and there is cooperation between the Australian Defence Force and the Sri Lankan Defence Forces, and also engagement by the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service.
Thank you. So you've outlined some of the Sri Lankan authorities who we engage with, the Sri Lankan Defence Forces. Could you outline all the Sri Lankan authorities, agencies that we're cooperating with?
I'm not sure I can provide a comprehensive list, but on-water disruptions are the purview of the Sri Lankan Navy. The Sri Lankan Police Force undertakes the normal policing role in Sri Lanka, which is primarily on land, and between those two are the large majority, if not all, of the disruption activity that takes place in Sri Lanka.
So could you take it on notice of what agencies, departments, authorities in Sri Lanka we are engaging with?
I can certainly take that on notice.
Thank you. And what is the nature of the cooperation and the role played by Australian authorities with these Sri Lankan agencies, authorities?
Those two Sri Lankan agencies participate in the joint working group on people smuggling and transnational crime, which is a new joint working group established in December 2012 and opened by Senator Carr. The engagement between Australian agencies and those agencies is primarily related to sharing experience and building capacity, and indeed a part of Senator Carr's four-point plan was focused on capacity building. That capacity is generally in what I'd call software rather than hardware. It's about training, it's about sharing experience, and people smuggling is but one element of that broader relationship between our police services and our navies.
So how many Australian personnel are involved in this cooperation in Sri Lanka? What's the number of people and the number of our boats? So trying to get an idea of the hardware that we've got there and the people we've got there.
We have no hardware there, Senator.
So no boats?
No boats. No.
How many people?
It would be the relevant staff from the High Commission who are there permanently, and visiting staff from a range of agencies who conduct training courses and other capacity building initiatives in Sri Lanka. I know from seeing recent reporting that there was a visit recently by the Attorney General's Department to provide training to magistrates, for instance, in terms of prosecuting people smuggling crimes.
So could we have some numbers there? How many visiting staff and how many staff from the High Commission are seconded to this project?
Senator, I think we can provide a general sense. I think it would be very difficult to provide a comprehensive list that would run across all agencies of the Australian Government.
But why would that be? Like, I'm not asking for people's names, it's just asking for the number of personnel, like the number of staff who are doing a job paid by the Australian public.
Well, I can certainly take that on notice and provide the best information we have available.
Thank you. Do these authorities, if I understood correctly, you're saying that a lot of the work is training. As well as training, what other activities are they involved in? Are they actually involved in physically intercepting boats, collecting intelligence on if the boats are leaving? Could you describe the extent of the work?
Well, Australian officials are not involved in disruption activities, directly involved in disruption activities in Sri Lanka. That is a matter for the sovereign state of Sri Lanka, and as to intelligence matters, I don't intend to comment on them.
So they're not directly involved, but I appreciate you can't, and I'm not asking you to go into details of the intelligence, but just to understand the work that they do. So they're not directly involved in intercepting boats, but the intelligence that they're involved in could help inform the Sri Lankan authorities of where the boats are leaving from and who's on the boats?
Senator, I'm not going to discuss intelligence matters.
Okay, thank you. And you spoke about that part of the work is people smuggling, dealing with people smuggling, and part of it is transnational crime. Could you quantify what dominates in terms of that work?
The joint working group's in its early stages of development, and the first meeting in Colombo had a significant focus on people smuggling. There was a range of transnational crimes discussed, primarily in terms of our police-to-police relationship, but primarily at this stage, the people smuggling focus. We're certainly interested in ensuring that there's a balanced agenda into the future so that we can sustain this institution.
So when you talk about transnational crime, could you give some specific examples? Because there have been some reports that the government is giving an emphasis to transnational crime to try and dilute that it's basically about people smuggling. So that's why I'm actually trying to understand the extent that if it is about transnational crime. So could you specify what crimes we're talking about and how much has been done about it?
Look, at this stage, it's still in its early stages of development. The first meeting was held in Colombo in December. The people smuggling agenda is very well developed. The transnational crime agenda is being developed, and certainly from the Australian side, we are keen to develop that. So at this stage, it's very difficult to identify specific crime types that would be the focus, and indeed AFP would be a much better agency to seek information about how we view the future of our bilateral cooperation on transnational crime.
So you can't give us even a mention, like if it's narcotics, organised crime? You haven't got to that point?
Not at this point, but certainly the agenda is one which we are keen to develop over the future.
So would you say to like a 10% transnational crime, 90% people smuggling at this stage? Could you give us some ballpark figures?
I couldn't give a specific figure, but I think it's fair to say that the majority of time spent at the first of the working group meetings was devoted to people smuggling, and we would anticipate that in future that will be balanced to ensure that the broad range of issues and both countries' interests in them are reflected in that agenda.
And what does the future mean? Does the future mean 6 months or in 3 years?
We plan to have these annually. The first one was in December last year. We are at a very early stage of planning for the next one. We will look to have them annually.
So in 1 year's time, do you have some targets you're aiming to in terms of developing the transnational work, or will you just start talking about it in a year's time?
I think that the agencies responsible for transnational crime within the Australian government are turning their attention to that and are developing programs for that. But I'm not aware at this stage of what they are.
So you're not sure if there's targets? Could you take it on notice if there's any targets in terms of developing increasing the amount of time or effort and resources on transnational crime compared to people smuggling? Yeah. Or is the people smuggling going to continue to dominate?
No, as I said, we are keen to have a balance of both people smuggling and transnational crime in the agenda for the next working group and for future working groups. I don't think there are at this stage developed targets for what we would discuss at the next joint working group on transnational crime, but agencies in Australia are developing a plan for the agenda for that meeting to ensure that transnational crime does play a balanced role within the joint working group.
So can we take from balance, like getting towards 50%? Is that what you mean by balance?
Well, I think it's difficult to quantify either over time or at any one time what a particular proportion is. But certainly we have an interest in ensuring that there is a balanced approach to this that sustains both countries' interest in this joint working group.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.